All right, friends, it's time to give you loyal listeners a discount on protein powder. You may or may not know, but I launched my very first protein powder 2 years ago. It's a grass-fed beef isolate with only 3 ingredients: grass-fed beef, either organic cacao or organic vanilla, and organic monk fruit. Now, if you don't want any of the added flavor and sweeteners, you can also just get unflavored. And no matter what flavor you choose, you're getting over 23 grams of protein per scoop, which is going to keep you full and satisfied between meals. I love starting my day with a Fab4 smoothie and breaking my fast with that much protein. It makes a serious difference in my cravings and blood sugar balance the rest of the day, and I've seen it with my clients as well. Now, I never thought I'd own a product company, but when I got pregnant with Sebastian, I realized the majority of protein powders were chemically extracted or enzymatically extracted, and I wanted to use heat and water only. I wanted minimal ingredients because we don't need those emulsifiers, fillers, or added vitamins, minerals, and probiotics. All of those additions increase the chances that it's not going to work for your body, whether it be bloating, digestion issues. I just wanted pure, clean protein to keep you full and satisfied so you could build the most delicious Fab4 smoothie. And I have to say, I'm pretty proud of the flavor. If you take a look at our reviews on Amazon, you'll see 5-star reviews for flavor. And that is key, because if you don't love your Fab4 smoothie and you don't love drinking your protein powder, you're not going to do it. It won't become a habit, and it's consistency that outpaces everything. So if you're here and you're listening and you want to give our protein powder a try, use the code PODCAST5 for $5 off your order. And let me know if you love it. My favorite ways to apply this protein powder is in my Fab4 smoothie, making freezer fudge, making chocolate milk, making hot chocolate, and throwing the unflavored into all my kids' baked goods. So let me know how you use it. Let me know if you love it, and share this podcast deal with your friends. Hey guys, welcome back to the show. I am halfway through my 3rd trimester with baby number 2, and I'm starting to think about breastfeeding. So today's guest is the perfect fit. It's Dr. Stephanie Canale, who specializes in family medicine at UCLA. But more importantly, for our purposes today, she is the CEO and founder of the Lactation Lab. The Lactation Lab was founded with a mission to bring scientific advancement to the field of breast milk research, and for the first time ever, offers a comprehensive, personalized analysis of mother's breast milk. And you've probably heard me talk about the Lactation Lab before, but the Lactation Lab was really important for me when Sebastian came home from CHLA. What I wanted to know was, what was my breast milk made of? And did Bash have everything that he needed for cognitive development? I was looking for nutrients like DHA. I was looking for choline, iron levels, B12. It gave me information on the macronutrients present in my breast milk and exactly what the calories per ounce was. It was the knowledge I needed to take charge of my nutrition throughout postpartum and to make sure that we were preventing deficiencies. I truly believe knowledge is power, so I hope that this podcast gives all those mamas out there some knowledge and some power. Well, without further ado, I am so excited to welcome Dr. Stephanie Canale to the show. Thank you so much for being here, Stephanie.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here and chat with you.
Well, it was just so serendipitous that when I was breastfeeding Sebastian, I heard about the Lactation Lab. And, personally, after everything we had been through, Sebastian going to CHLA, getting antibiotics, not knowing if there was HIE or brain, oxygen deprivation. It was really scary for me to think like, wow, I'd had this really perfect pregnancy. It felt great the whole time, worked out, ate clean, watched like every micronutrient and macronutrient I ingested. And then, as luck would have it, he's like taken from me within seconds of birth and pumped with a whole bunch of things I never wanted him to ever have. So it was like you were giving me that little bit of information that I could optimize his health from my end. And it was super powerful. Like I can't even tell you, from heavy metals to learning that my calories per ounce was low and that I was low in protein, which I was so surprised about. There's just so many things we need to unpack in this episode. I'm just really excited to have you. So I kind of want you to just get started with your background and how you decided to start the Lactation Lab and what it is.
So we are the only US company that's testing breast milk, and this was born from both clinical and personal experience. So I was a practicing family doctor at UCLA for over 15 years. And my second born, Emily, who's now 8, when she was about 5 or 6 weeks old, she was diagnosed with failure to thrive, which is a horrific term that I think as doctors, we should need to get rid of that term. But anyhow, so she was failure to thrive. So falling off the growth chart, despite me producing a ton of milk and her drinking a ton of milk, she would have a bowel movement every 10 to 12 days, which was really stressful for me. And what that meant was, in my mind, postpartum, going back to work when she's 5 weeks old, again, like producing tons of milk, having all of this pressure on myself because I wanted to breastfeed so badly. And it was the hardest thing that I had ever done. And so for me, it was basically failure to thrive meant I was a failure. Like, how did that not, that was, a linear equation in my mind. Like it just did not work out. And so it made me feel really bad about myself. It made me feel like, why couldn't I do what our bodies are supposed to do? And that's what got me started into thinking and looking into, like, what is in my milk, or what could be better? Clearly there's something missing. The day I gave her 2 ounces of formula, she had a bowel movement. She was happy. So clearly there was something missing here. And that's really what sparked the interest into, not only kind of what's in breast milk, but then the idea of just postpartum health in general, because I just feel like for myself, I'm a planner. I like data. I like information. I like to be in control, which I'm sure my husband will reinforce on that end, but I like to know what's happening. And I felt like, I think I had done maybe 300 deliveries myself before I was pregnant. So I felt like I felt like I knew what I was supposed to know. I felt like I knew what I was doing. I knew what to expect. But then breastfeeding hit. And it was like, for me, it was just I felt like the rug was pulled out from underneath me. I forget about taking a breastfeeding class. I was like telling my patients to breastfeed and, it's great for your baby. And I think my advice would stop there. And I look back and apology to all those patients, because I like, wow. I mean, now I tell people, I'm like, for me, it was the hardest thing. And I think that for me, it was, and what I've seen over the years is like, there's more and more and more pressure to do so. You've got the World Health Organization, American Academy of Pediatrics, CDC, breastfeeding. But I just want to, first of all, make the point that both of my kids had formula. Otherwise they wouldn't be alive. Any amount of breast milk can be beneficial. So for that mom who can produce half an ounce, 1 ounce, great. But what we eat really does affect our milk, and it affects our bodies. And that's really what got me into, what does change. And this whole notion that breast milk is this magical, perfect bodily fluid that is ever so perfect for every child, no matter what mother it comes from, just sort of led me down this path of, I think we need to unpack all of these myths that are so pervasive in women's health, and this lack of data and information. And it just doesn't even make sense physiologically. If you have a mom who's significantly low in B12, her body doesn't magically make more for her milk and leave her depleted. Right. But it's this whole like culture and society that we've accepted that, but the breast milk will be fine. It's just mom that's depleted. And we're really on a mission to change that, because it's not okay. Mm-hmm. It's not okay. And there are things we can do to make, milk the best possible. But what that does in turn is it replenishes mom's stores, so she feels better too.
Yeah, I think the depletion that happens postpartum, especially when people are ending up back at work 6 weeks later, or, have low milk supply, or have a baby with colic, or God forbid, your child goes to the NICU or whatever. It's the wild, wild west. The minute you become a mom, you're like, wait a second, everything I know went out the window. I feel like I can't make a decision. I'm like, down the rabbit holes of Dr. Google. And I think what you're providing is a real tangible piece of information that can help everybody feel better. And so I'd love to learn a little bit more about how what we eat affects our breast milk, and what are some of those nutrients of concern, or the ones you're looking for to be optimized so that everybody feels great and, and the benefits for baby with that.
Right. So, I mean, the benefits for breast milk for baby are, if anything, just, I would say almost even a little overwhelming right now, right? So the data suggests breastfed babies get sick less, fewer infections, fewer allergies, decreased rates of diabetes, obesity, moms who breastfeed, less incidence of high blood pressure, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, ovarian cancer. So again, I think that just adds more weight and more pressure to do so. I think the reality is, first of all, I think a lot of moms struggle. I mean, the last statistic I read was 95% of women are breastfeeding now versus 40% in 2010.
Wow.
But 92, which is almost everybody, is reporting having issues.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the norm when 92% of any group are having, something. So that's the norm. And so what I started to look at was both macro and micronutrients. Is this magical fluid that's ever changing? And the reality is it's not. It is magical. We could say that because there's a lot of great immune cells and stem cells and bacteria in milk, believe it or not, that are so beneficial to baby's health. Whether it be from not only from an immune standpoint, from a neurologic standpoint, which then develops new cognition, but then also the infant's gut health, super important. So what we started to look at, and we took us about a year to do this research, and we looked at every published study that had ever talked about term milk. So we differentiated from preterm babies in the NICU because all of those studies really focus on fat, calorie, protein, carbohydrate. Those kiddos are on such a low volume, high protein diet. Mm-hmm. And we looked at term milk. What does a mom, when she does eat, when she does supplement, if she's vegetarian, if she's vegan, how does that change? And so we started to see some correlations. So I would say that there are sort of we have a top 5, I'd say, that, moms need to, be aware of. But there's more that you can do while pregnant to get ready for breastfeeding than just take a class. And so this goes on to this idea, this whole notion of yes, mom's stores do get depleted, but it doesn't happen just the day the baby's delivered. It's happening progressively along the way. So in third trimester, the data does suggest that a woman's B12 level and her iron stores, which, normally that you just get a hemoglobin level checked and you don't get an iron panel done at the doctor's office, but those will correlate with what's in a mother's milk. Vitamin A is another vitamin we don't talk about very often here because it's fortified in dairy and a lot of processed dairy products. And so people don't really talk about it. But what we see is a lot of women, once they are breastfeeding, all of a sudden they're like, okay, clearly, if you ask any breastfeeding mom, they're like, clearly what I eat affects my kid, because they'll be 2 to 3 hours later, super gassy and fussy. They were fine. And then they're like, oh yeah, I had that kale salad and, or I had a plate of Brussels sprouts. Yeah, that makes sense. So I think that at that point, I think it's important to kind of, I see these poor moms go on these crazy elimination diets and have no idea, talk about wild, wild west, have no idea what to do. So then they're told, okay, well, avoid dairy. It can take 3 weeks for the proteins to leave your system and for the milk to not show any residue of, let's say, cow's milk protein if you're avoiding dairy.
Wow.
Then soy. People go down this, talk about a black hole where people are just, they have no answers. So what we're trying to do is just give a little bit of control and give some things that moms can do at a time when a lot of people feel like, the rug's been pulled out from underneath them and there's a lot of unknowns. So there actually are a lot of knowns and things that a mom can control. A lot of times it's just focusing. So vitamin A, back to that one, it's really easy to just eat a couple servings of, anything orange a couple days. And so to know to focus on that is really easy. Vitamin C is one that we actually see pretty low in milk, and B12. And it's funny that B12 is one that, honestly, the vegans and vegetarians are probably the highest because I think they know they can be low in B12, so they know to take a separate supplement. I also think I think women have been, through pregnancy, postpartum, and definitely lactation, have been misled to think that a prenatal vitamin over the counter can just make up for every other, lack of what's in their diet. And, I mean, what's in vitamins, what's in some of these vitamins, there's just like negligible amount of this, that, and the other. So I think it gives like a false sense of security in some ways. It's better than nothing, but at the same time, I think it's really delving into what's in there, how much is there, and what does that individual person need? Because I don't think it's one size fits all when it comes to a vitamin.
So let's make sure that I have all of your top 5, the things that you're looking for when you're talking about the top 5. Does that include the B12, vitamin A?
Yeah, vitamin C. And I would say iron is another important one. So, it's recommended now for babies that they get both a vitamin D and an iron supplement at birth once breastfeeding has been established. And very few moms and doctors that I'm aware of are really pushing the iron supplement for babies. I mean, it's very hard to absorb. It really upsets their tummies and so forth. And, no mother I know is going to try to give their child a supplement that they know is going to keep them up all night. So there's ways that moms can take care of the iron in their own milk. And I think in third trimester, it's pretty clear. We know who's going to have issues and who won't, because that third trimester blood test will really clue us into what's going on. Again, like it's interesting, vegans and vegetarians, we tend to see very high iron levels. And I think it's just the awareness that, the point is like iron doesn't have to come from red meat. And what is in an actual in a prenatal vitamin is just, again, really, really, really low. And even if you're taking that amount, how much are you actually absorbing and then transferring to milk? So there's a lot of things to do. And that's one that we like to really treat with food. That makes sense. Like just really focus on how people can get more iron through their diet, because taking a lot of iron supplements are just really tough to digest.
Definitely. So is that something when you're talking about your third trimester blood draw, because I'm in my third trimester right now, and I just had my blood draw yesterday, actually. I know that they were checking me for vitamin D, and other recommendations you would have for women in their third trimester would be to check their B12 levels, check their iron levels, and then get their vitamin D status, because that'll tell us right now, like if I'm leaning towards deficient right now, I'm going to be totally depleted come breastfeeding my baby.
Okay. And we can start supplementing you now so that that's not an issue. So you have time to build up those stores as well.
That's great. About how long does it take to build up stores of nutrients on average?
They're all different. Iron is going to be the longest. Vitamin C, all of the water-soluble vitamins will be pretty quick. And the fat-soluble vitamins will take a little bit longer as well. So I'd say the iron's the longest. Then vitamin A, D, E, and K may take a little bit of time. So again, the vitamin D, I love that your doctor checked that. And that's something that, depending on where you're at, you might want to really start supplementing right now. An interesting story, I actually met the leading researcher who looked at vitamin D and was on the panel for the American Academy of Pediatrics recommending how much vitamin D should be recommended for babies each day. And we had a really interesting conversation. And when his daughter was pregnant, he recommended that she take 10,000 IUs a day of vitamin D through pregnancy. Of course, to everyone listening, that's not what's recommended, but it was interesting that the person who's researching this, testing the milk, seeing what's happened, recommends, of course, multitudes of times higher than what we're recommending people do. So it's just a bare minimum.
Right. It's interesting. I have a prenatal that has 4,000 IUs, and I take 1,000 IUs in a dropper with K2 daily. So I'm like close to 5, but it's interesting just to see the variations, because there are so many prenatal supplements that have just literally the minimal amount to prevent deficiency in non-pregnant women, not even taking into account pregnancy. And so it's been really hard for me to find and recommend prenatal vitamins, only because some of them are just at such suboptimal levels that I like what you're saying, that you really cannot rely on that. You can't just have like saltine crackers in your prenatal and hit what you need, I mean, it's crazy to see. I think with a lot of prenatals too, they're white labeled, right? So it's the same stuff. It just has a different fancy label on it. And, I don't know if you're ready to talk about heavy metals, but sorry about that. We can jump right into that, because I know supplementation, like that's one of the things that people are asking me all the time. Like, can I still have my maca? What about what about these other supplements I was taking for hair, skin, and nails? And like, what about, and it's, you know, a lot of times most of the nutraceuticals and supplements will say like, consult your doctor. This wasn't tested on pregnant women, or there's a warning. And I think like real whole foods throughout your pregnancy just feels like the safest, with like a tested and tried and true prenatal. And then we just like keep it really minimal. But I'd love for you to expand on what you see from your end when people are kind of just taking whatever's on the shelf.
Well, yeah, so it brings me to this. So I was interviewed for an article earlier, right before COVID hit. And it was basically a woman who was studying, and her point was exactly that like the FDA does not regulate what's in these supplements. So they worked with an independent lab and they tested over 200 brands over the counter. They just bought random prenatal vitamins. Mm-hmm. And what was shocking was the amount of lead in these vitamins. So I don't think any of these companies are intentionally going out to manufacture something with lead in it. Right, but when you buy really cheap ingredients and you don't necessarily care where they come from, and you're not necessarily paying attention, or you're not really monitoring the manufacturing practice itself, that's how it happens. There's no such thing as a safe lead exposure to a pregnant or non-pregnant woman. Yeah. That does not exist. It's not like, oh, well, there's a little bit, you're fine. Mm-hmm. So the lead exposure itself is just fascinating. We also started, when we first started testing breast milk, we started to notice trends, and we would see these very high arsenic levels. Mm-hmm. And that kind of got us into this whole notion of, okay, where is this coming from? Is it water? Is it rice? What's happening here? And I think that what we've seen most often is, so not only rice, for some people it's water supply, but we're tightly regulated in the United States. I'd say the only women we've ever tested their milk that have had arsenic in it from their water supply have been women who have well water sources. So rice is something that I think we need to be concerned about. I mean, there are a lot of women who are breastfeeding and who are eating rice multiple times throughout the day or every day. Mm-hmm. Easy. Bland, I get it, but there can be, that's a concern. And then knowing where your foods are grown from. Mm-hmm. Because it's not like you can get rid of heavy metals. You can't say that, oh, well, this ground, we're just gonna, and just because something is organic doesn't mean it disappears either. It's just being aware of where your food comes from. I agree with you, like whole foods. And what we try to do with a lot of our results, people are a little surprised. We don't give people a total list of, okay, go take this. And, but a lot of times it's just eat more of this and incorporate this into your diet somehow. So I'm a big fan of smoothies and, lactation bars and so forth. So we did a study, it's not published yet, we just submitted it, where we looked at lactation bars, cookies, shakes, and all that stuff that were on the market. And what we were concerned about is that a lot of them are manufactured with brown rice syrup. Yeah. And so we wanted to know, and we actually found a few that actually have high arsenic. So again, I feel like we are misleading each other in thinking that this is a great, wonderful, easy product. Again, no one is intended here, but the reality is if a child or a growing fetus is exposed to arsenic, it's very scary what's going on. There's a group of toxicologists that I've worked with at UCLA, and in animal studies, low-level chronic arsenic exposure, so kind of on a daily or recurring basis, has an autistic-like picture. Wow. And so there's more to this heavy metal story that I think we're just beginning to unravel and unfold here. Mercury is another one. I think it really, there are charts that are put out even by the CDC, for goodness sake, that say like, please avoid these types of fish. I think that's really important. I mean, these metals don't disappear. So I think it's just being careful of what you are eating. I think for a lot of women too, nausea, morning sickness doesn't just happen in the first trimester. It can happen throughout pregnancy, throughout the day. And so I think you're right. Saltine crackers and a prenatal vitamin, not enough. But we can work with, there are ways to get those nutrients that are not so, seemingly overwhelming with large meals when you're completely nauseous.
Right.
So that's, I'm a big fan of smoothies and stuff.
Me too. Smoothies for me really supported me in my first trimester. I mean, I wasn't as green as I normally am because I was like, that doesn't sound good. But a little blueberry almond butter situation was really, really nice and cold and not smelly, and really, really supportive of like me getting some nutrition in for baby. And then also I found that like regular eggs, like either like a scrambled egg or something like that, where you're getting the choline and the DHA and the protein, but you're not having to get it through fish, because there was this time around, my first pregnancy, I could eat whatever I wanted. This time around, I've had major food aversions and had a hard time with stuff in my first trimester. Luckily, I'm like through that. But, knowing what I know about nutrients and how am I getting them from my food, trying not to be stressed out about that, but instead really just focusing on like, where's the positive on my plate? Did I get and keep the prenatal down? Am I drinking water? Like, it's just those little tweaks that we can make along the way that are really, I think, really supportive of making sure that our milk supply is where it's at. So I do have a couple questions about supply, because that's one of the questions we get all the time is, how do I get my milk supply up? Does the research really suggest that oats and flax and fenugreek have an effect, or is it overall calorie, intake? Is it overall nutrient intake? And I'd love for you to unpack a little bit about, your experience with your daughter's failure to thrive, and the fact that you were a milkmaid. You were producing. It wasn't that you weren't producing. So can we talk about calories per ounce and the macronutrient side of things, and like, how are we getting our supply up, but making sure that it's the good stuff?
Well, I think that's, a fantastic question. I think that it's, again, I think as women have been, and I'm speaking from my experience with patients and so forth, and my experience with the moms that have reached out to us over the years, we've been misled to think that, there's this very conflicting advice out there. Breast milk is this magical bodily fluid that's ever so changing, perfect for baby. It'll just take whatever it needs and leave mom depleted. But yet, there are people like me who tons of milk, and you're like, okay, clearly there's something missing here. So there's more to the story. That can change. And so we actually had two moms, really interesting stories. One was a mom whose child was failure to thrive. She was adamant about breastfeeding. She's like, I want to make this work. She was feeding on demand. Where does the basis of feeding on demand come from? It comes from the fact that over a 24-hour period, kids will get the same amount of fat, whether they feed 15 small feeds or 5 long feeds. With that mom, they will get the same amount of total fat. So that's where the whole notion of on-demand feeding is. You will get enough. You can tell I get very passionate about this stuff, because this goes into the idea of like learning more about this, getting more data information. I think that there are groups out there that think this is innately stressful for women. And I am completely on the other end of this. I think information is powerful, and information lessens anxiety for a lot. And I think it really helps regain control. So I'm on the opposite side. So our kits, I just want to make a quick point. Our kits work in two ways. For moms who are, just struggling, it's just such a pain in the ass to breastfeed. I get it. They do our kit when they can see on paper what their milk looks like, or the composition of their milk compared to formula. For some, that's like, okay, that gives them the ammo to keep going. They're like, this is great stuff. It also works in the same way when a kid's failure to thrive, mom tests her milk, and her milk can be ridiculously low in calories, and she's at her wit's end. It can also validate her and give her the okay that if she supplements, it's fine. It's information. But what a mom can do is she can change that over time. So we featured a mom on Good Morning America a couple of years ago where she was failure to thrive. Kid was almost admitted to the hospital. Her first milk, and I'm going to compare it to formula. The average infant formula is 20 kilocalories per ounce. Her first milk was around 12 to 13 calories per ounce. So her kid, not doing well, but she wanted to breastfeed, saw every pediatric specialist you could imagine, supplementing while still nursing. So definitely supplementing. 2 months later, tested her milk. It was 16 calories per ounce. Of course, we were like moms on a diet too. Like when I say diet, eating more,
Yeah.
Drinking more, like on a meal plan, I should say, not diet.
Yeah.
And then by the time this little segment was aired, her child was 13 months old, still nursing. Her milk was 22 kilocalories per ounce, which is a creamy formula. Yep. As chunky as could be. And we actually had a mom during COVID, similar situation. She was working as a paramedic. Husband was a firefighter. And I think their child was born like right at the end of February, beginning of March, which I can't imagine. And she was struggling, and everyone around her was telling her, your child needs formula. Your child needs formula, formula, formula. So her initial milk was around like 15.5 kilocalories per ounce. And then she gave it I think it was like two months. And because of course, going to the doctor every week, everyone's telling her, there's nothing worse than feeling like you're starving your child.
Right.
Like to me, that's a different level of mommy guilt.
Right.
You got the baseline, and then that takes it to a whole new level when you actively think you're starving your child despite trying to feed them. Mm-hmm. And then she tested her milk again, and it was like 24 kilocalories per ounce. And so it was an amazing story. She's like, my husband, we just kept track of our calories. She significantly increased her caloric intake. She was drinking, 10 glasses of water a day. Her husband would make her a smoothie and just keep track of like, okay, this is what we need to add in here because we need extra this. And so to me, those are our success stories when we can help a mom do what she wants to do and feel good about it. So if that's whether or not, some people do our kit and they're like, okay, well, everyone's telling me to do formula. I do want to do that, but I just feel like a really crappy mom if I do that. Sometimes they see the results, they feel better about it. Vice versa, when we can say to a mom, okay, well, it's tough. You're in a lull right now, but we can help you see the value of all of this hard work, the pumping, the mastitis, the cracked and bloody nipples, the pain that goes along with it. When people can see the value of that, as opposed to just looking at, a bottle in the fridge, I think it's really empowering for women to then see how far this can go. So the last nutrient, by the way, that I wanted to chat about was DHA and how important it is.
Well, I love that you have told these stories because I think when women feel that mom guilt on top of the normal mom guilt and they feel like they can't get it together, just knowing that getting serious about tracking your food intake and getting serious about tracking your nutrient intake, I mean, that's exactly what I did. That was my experience with Lactation Lab. Like, I got it back and I was looking for, I was looking for iron. I was looking for DHA. I was looking for calories. I was looking for anything that I was depleted in just because I was so worried about Sebastian's brain, not knowing at that time, like really what was going to be his future. And he's such a bright little boy. And I'm, Chris and I are relieved every single day that we have our happy ending, but it was so empowering. And I am a big proponent of that information. Like you said, not being overwhelming, but actually looking at that and going like, holy cow, like I eat a lot of protein. I don't understand how my my calories per ounce is so low. And, and knowing that I hit my pre-pregnancy weight within a month of giving birth of Sebastian, like I was able to be active. I was able to eat the way I normally eat. It wasn't I didn't gain as much in that pregnancy. And I went through the stores on my body pretty quickly and I was a new mom. I wasn't sleeping as much. I was shoving things in my mouth from my cabinets in my fridge. And you gave me that ammo to be like, no, like this mama needs to meal prep. I need to make grass-fed meatballs. I need to make like salmon fillets. I need to eat more eggs. I need to get more protein shakes in, like whatever it is, but I need to up this so that he's getting what he needs. And I thought, wow, that was like so powerful. And it's obvious from your stories that you've given other women the opportunity to do the exact same. And I think looking at whether it's looking at your nutrient, your nutrient intake and how it is translating into your results. And then also looking at all of these micronutrients and knowing like DHA and iron and B12, they all have cognitive development outcomes for your children. And that is like I think we did so great during our pregnancy and then we had our baby and now it's just like, okay, the breast milk's going to do everything it needs to do. But I would love for you to unpack DHA. I would love for you to go into the cognitive development nutrients because their brain is still so new. They're developing so much in those first year to the fifth year even. So please, let's empower some women to check and to look for specific nutrients in their food.
Yeah, I think the DHA is really key here. I mean, I'm surprised, like back to the prenatal idea of like, there's a lot of prenatals that will come with a DHA or the DHA supplement on the shelf. I think we're kind of, they're called essential fatty acids because we are, our bodies don't make them. And I think that it's really, again, like what's been really frustrating, I guess, in this whole process is learning how something becomes the recommended daily amount and what the recommended intake is. And not only has there sometimes a lack of research in that area, but sometimes when you see the research and then you actually see the recommendation, there is a mismatch there. And these recommendations are typically, on average, much lower than what the study showed. And they do that because, again, don't want to stress people out, don't want to make people spend too much money. I don't know what the reasoning is. I'm pretending to know.
Being conservative.
Yeah, just being conservative. I think DHA is something we don't need to be conservative with. So I would say, I usually tell people to take a plant-based DHA, and that's because of the mercury that's found in fish oil tablets and capsules.
So an algae.
Yeah, algae-based.
So just, I think that's important to recognize too, because I think sometimes people will see, they'll turn it over and they'll say omega-3 on the front, and it's a source, a flax source or a short chain fatty acid, not the DHA, which is the long chain fat. EPA and DHA being your long chain fatty acids.
Yep. Yeah. I remember when we first started testing milk, we would do this whole panel of every fatty acid found in breast milk. And it was so funny. The chemist calls me and he's like, are all of these moms drinking coconut water or something? There's all these medium chain fatty acids. And so I think that what we're starting to see is those play a very important role in immune function. So fatty acids are so essential. I mean, one big thing that I usually tell people is like, we need to stop talking about foremilk and hindmilk. It's just a timing process. There's no big difference here. But foremilk does have essential amino acids. Hindmilk, let's get away from those older terms, but DHA is super important. B12, not only does it play an important role with cognition as well, but it's also neurodevelopment. So back to my story for a second about the mom guilt. So when my daughter was 3, she was starting to have, so she's the failure to thrive, pooping every 10 to 12 days. Sweetest thing, but boy, it's stressful.
To a mom who's a doctor. No,
right, for the mom who's a doctor. Yeah. And then at 3, she started having these falls and concussions. So she had no front teeth for like 3 years, but the dentist finally had to take them out. She's like, she's fallen so many times, we've got to remove these. So she would just faceplant. Walking down the street, all of a sudden, faceplant. And so she has seen every pediatric specialist. I'm like, she definitely has to have something going on neurologically. And it was her urologist, after she was diagnosed with a kidney infection, asymptomatic, of course, just a fever. And her urologist was like, well, she has spina bifida. So her spinal cord ends higher up than usual. And then again, it brought me back to this moment where I was like, wow, I found out I had very low B12 levels. If I would have known before I was pregnant with her that that's what my level was, and I had been really strict about taking a supplement and folic acid, could that have prevented this? And I don't think anyone can ever say yes.
You can't look in the rearview mirror. Yeah.
You can't look in the rearview mirror, but boy, is it staring at you.
Yeah.
When you're having those moments, you're looking at your kid like where they can't even chew their food because they've had surgery to remove their teeth because they've had so many concussions. It's sort of like, talk about a whole new level of mom guilt. Like, I just felt like, wow, could I have prevented that? I mean, I'll never know. I'm not going to, she's fine now. It's just one more thing that just made me really get into this, into a deeper level, to be like, I don't want any other mom to second guess themselves the way I did, the way I do. I say did, like it's all over, like mom guilt doesn't end. It
Right.
does. It was never, not ending in my book, but I think it just changes over time. And I think that one thing that I wish I knew was just how much what I ate affected her. And I think there's, again, like an interesting psychology that happens, right? Like if you tell moms when you're nursing, take these supplements, so important, and make sure you're eating well. And some do, some don't. Yeah. You're trying your best, you're sleep deprived, you're exhausted. But when you can show them that your milk directly needs extra A, B, C,
they do it.
Yeah, because it affects their child.
So let's, if you can you make recommendations for supplementation of DHA, B12, and iron, those 3 really important nutrients for cognitive and neurodevelopment for babies?
Yeah. Well, I think the B12 is, I think, a little misleading. I mean,
because it's water soluble.
Just a little misleading also because I think a lot of people, like there's a lot of brands out there that'll say we're B complex, we're your complete B solution.
Yeah.
And it's B12 in particular that's studied and B12 in particular. And we see quite deficient in what I call the pseudo-vegetarians, the people who eat meat, but they'll eat meat maybe once every 2 weeks, once a month. So they don't consider themselves vegetarian because they'll eat meat, but they're just such a little intake.
So they're not supplementing like a vegan.
Right. So,
but they're, yeah. I got you.
That 1 or 2, those 2 meals a month aren't cutting it either.
Yeah.
But eggs are a great source. And, I can't say enough about that. And I think that just finding whatever works. So, B12 comes in sprays, tablets, sublingual, capsules, chewies, gummy, whatever works for that mom. Mm-hmm. I just also recommend looking at the source of these, of where they're manufactured and are they independently tested. The DHA we talked about too, I think is so important. The fish oil, I think, is just misleading in terms of fish oil, omega-3. There's a lot of labels out there, but then actually, focusing on 400 milligrams of DHA that's ideally plant-based from algae is an ideal world. And it is more expensive and it's more expensive because it costs so much more to produce. Mm-hmm. So B12, 1,000 micrograms is what we recommend.
Okay.
The DHA, 400 milligrams. Iron, ideally 18 milligrams, but that depends on how much a mom can get in her diet.
Right, because you got to look at your blood test first.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. Exactly. So that's very specific to each mom. Vitamin C, we recommend an extra 500 milligrams. Mm-hmm. And vitamin A, 5,000 international units.
I love it. I love data. I love research. I love the tangibles, because you're giving people who are listening to this podcast so many options. Like if they're breastfeeding, they're in their 3rd trimester, what should you be asking your doctor to test you for in your blood? What should you be looking for? Look for those deficiencies now. Make sure that your stores, that you're upping those stores so that you aren't depleted postpartum. And then you're giving all those moms out there who maybe their child is fussy in those first 8 weeks and they're like, I'm feeding, I have milk, I don't know what the problem is. But, they go to their pediatrician and the growth chart isn't tracking the way it should. And that's really scary.
Yeah. I mean, it's scary when any child doesn't do what they're quote unquote supposed to do, right?
Oh God. And then no one tells you they all sort of figure it out and catch up. But it is.
Well, I mean, we actually found that there was a need for that too. So at Lactation Lab, we recently expanded to offer telehealth services for those exact purposes. So women who are thinking, I want to become pregnant, what can you do? Women who are pregnant and of course through breastfeeding. So now we have the ability, we could say, oh, well, your level in your milk was really low. Or if you're pregnant, we can order those extra blood tests so then a mom can just go to a lab, get them done. We can start the supplements with her and so forth. And we're, in about a month, we'll have our companion app ready to go, which will be doing check-ins with mom, which I feel so strongly about, and also keep not only tracking breastfeeding journeys of like how many minutes on each boob and how many pee and poo diapers, but also what mom's eating and prompts to just make sure that they're, staying on top of their own health.
Gosh, such good stuff, such tangible information, so many action steps. I'm obviously so pumped up you came on the podcast. I want everyone to know where to find you, how to get hooked up with the Lactation Lab. So please share all of your social stuff, the website, anything that you think the moms listening should know.
So our site is lactationlab.com, Instagram at Lactation Lab, and we sell our kits at fsastore.com for those. We're working on getting FSA dollars on our site and also on Amazon.
I love it so much. It's really empowering what you're doing. And especially coming from your personal experience, I think you have the heart and empathy for it. And that's really needed in this space. So I just can't thank you enough for really doing the work to provide this lab to moms, because like I said, for me, it was really comforting to know that there was something I could do after 2 weeks at CHLA to make sure that this little guy, my little favorite Bashy Bear would be okay. And it's really, knowledge is power. And so I just can't thank you enough. And I'll get with you after the podcast. We'll make sure that people have links on the show notes and that there's something that we can offer them as well. So just to make sure that if people are interested, they know that they can find all of the information in the show notes for today's podcast, along with your recommendations, a link to the labs that I used as well. So, thank you, Stephanie. I really appreciate your time. This has been just amazing.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.
Mine too.
Thank you for listening to Be Well by Kelly. Please subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Learn more at bewellbykelly.com and follow me on Instagram at bewellbykelly. I would love if you picked up my books, Body Love and Body Love Every Day. They're sold on Amazon and at all major booksellers.